welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. For those curious about the background music, we're listening to Prokofiev today. Lesser known work, the Scythian Suite, will be followed by Lieutenant Kijay. This podcast goes long enough. Okay, well, let's talk about the background image first. That'll give you a sense of where we're going today. This is some computer-generated art, AI art, given the prompt, let's see, tag wrestling between God and Karma's A team and Lucifer and Lilith's B team. And we're going to title this one an Omnist take on sin and atonement. This is a subject that I think is much on people's mind as we contemplate possibly an apocalyptic end to our life, our culture, our country, our whole world, in fact. There's a lot of worry in the world about, am I going to be on the right side of whatever's coming? And that's what we're going to delve into now from an Omnist viewpoint, which is going to differ from some of the most popular viewpoints of the most popular religions and or anti-religions or I'm not religious viewpoints that are out there today. So if I offend anyone with anything I'm going to say, I apologize ahead of time, but this is what I know from my experience. Now we'll start with, as I usually do, with a little review. Creation is process. God is not perfect. Didn't start perfect. Still isn't perfect. No soul is perfect. There's no such thing as perfect. Anybody who tries to be perfect is being imperfect without knowing it, because they're a royal pain in the ass to everyone around them who gets in the way of their perfection. If you've known any of these people who are virtue signaling their way to heaven, you know what I mean. They can be real pains in the ass because they insist on the world matching up to their perfection, which it doesn't, and when it doesn't, then they have a tendency to look down on the world. Okay, so why did I preface it this way? Creation, as anybody who knows who has ever created anything, requires a catalyst, requires some sort of a force, a need. That need comes from something that creates confusion, can create chaos. And anyone who has tried to mix up a new recipe just out of the blue without really much knowledge of cooking or how ingredients work can attest to the fact that it often ends up in a disaster, a chaotic mess that nobody wants to eat. This is how creation worked. Okay, so I'm sorry, Christians, your idea of a perfect God, or Muslims, in fact, all the Abrahamic faiths have this nonsense idea of an almighty creator that made everything perfect in 6 days and then went off to the golf course and played. I'm sorry, that's not how it works. That was never how it works. That's not how it works now. Creation is a process of becoming more perfect in one's own way and finding a way to spend more time around people that like that way, that agree with that way, than people that don't like that way and disagree with it and don't like to be around you. And that's the whole point of what we created here, what we're working on. And it's not perfect. Anyone who has eyes to see knows that the world is not perfect. There is no soul out here that is perfect. Your guru, your religious leader, the person you look up to as the perfect celebrity is not perfect. They take a shit like anybody else. They have their bad days. They have their moods. They have their blind spots. And this is true of all souls. From the wet behind the ears newborns to the oldest, most experienced God. Now, you can argue about that, and as an Omnist, I accept that you have other ideas. There are Omnist Christians. You can be an Omnist Christian. You can be an Omnist anything. An Omnist take on things means being willing to change your view on matters spiritual and scientific. In fact, an Omnist doesn't see any difference between spirituality and science. They all must fit within one framework, or you're basing your framework on a lie, a fantasy. And this is what I attempt to do. And so when I tell you something, it's because this is what I have deduced through my experience and my knowledge. I'm a trained physicist. I have a ton of experience in the electronics industry designing and testing products, both hardware and software, both embedded and distributed. I have a lot of experience with large organizations and the problems of managing large organizations. This is what informs what I say to you, and you are welcome to challenge it. Welcome to disagree with it, but I would ask you to do so with an open mind if you are of an Omnist inclination, and see if you can poke a hole in anything I'm telling you. Okay, so sin is something that has had to be defined. It is one of these nebulous words like love. And, people have been writing for thousands of years trying to define what love is. And not near as much effort has gone into defining what sin is. You kind of look at the Bible, you get a sense that sin was not all that well defined. The Ten Commandments do a relatively poor job of laying out what is sinful. Just take the "thou shalt not kill" phrase. Well, does that mean that, pulling up a plant and eating it is killing? Shooting a deer, eating the meat is killing. Taking deviant out of society so that they won't hurt anybody anymore, taking out a Hitler, a Mussolini, is killing. I would say that those are justified killings. You cannot live, in fact, without killing things. Every time you breathe, you are taking in a bunch of organisms that some of which you will kill. Your body will kill them and process them for food, or process them as excrement, prevent them from trying to kill you. It is a rather dog-eat-dog world in the animal-plant kingdom. And this is a feature, an important feature of physical reality, of incarnation. It's not something you can avoid. Unlike, many Buddhists and Hindus think, well, oh, if I'm just a vegetarian, then I will have no karma. That's nonsense. You're still killing things all the time, and you're taking advantage of others who are not as fortunate as you and can't afford to have a healthy vegetarian diet. It takes a lot of resources to produce an equivalent amount of calories and nutrients and so forth from a vegetable diet as it does to a meat-based diet, depending on where you're at. Not every place is lush with nutritious vegetables, and a lot of those things have to be imported. If they're imported, they're shipped on shipping containers, which are doing damage to the environment. So, this idea of sin is not as easy as it would seem to be. And it's not something you can necessarily avoid. So it's something that you want to minimize. Very similar to the discussions we've had about love. That, love on the surface sounds like a great thing, and more of it is great. But in fact, too much love can do harm. Aiding and enabling and empowering those who have weaknesses and defects can encourage those defects to grow and become very sinful defects. Can turn a person into a narcissist, a sociopath, a psychopath, even a megalomaniac. If you look at pretty much any of the really dark characters of history, you will find that there is a mother that gave that child too much love and encouraged too many dark impulses, saying that those were all right. Oh, it's okay, we will love you. So sin, in fact, can contain too much love. It can be a sin to give too much love as a parent. You are not being a good parent if you enable bad behavior and encourage it and let it grow and fester into worse behavior. So sin is not an easy concept. Especially many religions tie sin to belief and swearing to dogma. Well, thou shalt have no other God but me. Well, that is a nonsense sin. Because think about it. If God was an almighty, all-powerful, micromanaging master of the universe, by nature of power, he would be a tyrant. And it's very possible that God has been a tyrant in the past. That is a common sin to fall into when you have a lot of power. That's why I like to remind people that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And as above, so below. If God was a tyrant, all-powerful, God would be evil by nature, would be doing very bad things, just as we see our dictators, our clueless leaders, our masters of huge globalist corporations doing evil things because they don't intend to do evil, but they have a lot of power and they don't mind they get comfortable exercising it. And they get comfortable with collateral damage. In fact, they don't mind it at all. That's the easiest way to solve a problem, is to whack off a few heads. By God, they'll do it in a hot second. And I've seen that personally within the corporations that I worked. I've literally been in a location of a big company where over 50% of the staff was laid off in a single day. Now that is some heartless action. And not even because a bunch of money was being lost. No, just because new management had come in and decided that they need to look like they were really doing something good for the company, and decided the easiest way to do it was to whack off a bunch of heads. Chop the chives, as they call it in China. This is evil. This is sinful. And it gets rewarded in this society. That is wrong. And, this leads many to think, well, gosh, there's no God. Can't be a God that would allow all this stuff. Well, you misunderstand again who God is. God has created a system that allows each soul to succeed or fail. This physical world is a testing ground. It's not all there is. If you base your worldview, your theology, your idea, your belief system only on this world, and you have no concept of the soul going on after this, you cannot possibly come up with a healthy explanation of what's going on here. You're going to, come away with a very dark nihilistic idea of what's going on, and, either commit suicide because you don't want to be a part of this, disconnect into a little corner where you can avoid being part of this dystopian system, or embrace it and become, just another of the grasping assholes that's screwing everybody in sight. And we've seen in spades all of those poles exercised by those who don't accept that this is the only place, that there's more to the multiverse than this one universe we find ourselves in. More to a life than one single life, one single incarnation. So, you can argue whether I'm right or wrong, but I can tell you that it is extremely dystopian to think any other way. And there's incredible amount of evidence that the soul is a real thing. I like to remind people to go look at the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, who spent his entire career scientifically studying in the greatest detail the phenomena of past life remembrance among children. Very common occurrence, not super common, but maybe 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,000 or more children will have some memory of a past life, very strong memories, to the extent that the most famous case was a young man who had remembrance of being airman involved in one of the major battles of the Pacific, who was killed in an air raid. And that child, this is, like 40 years later, something like that, 20, 40 years later, could remember every detail of that raid, could remember the squadron members' names, could remember dates, ship names, could recount the whole experience. And in fact, upon checking many of these things, he recounted stuff that was not recorded anywhere, was not known to any of the survivors of this battle, or the airman's family. And this, he studied, I think, something like 4,000 children. And while it was more common for this to happen in cultures that believed in reincarnation, in India particularly, it does happen worldwide. It's just that children are more likely to report it in a culture that accepts you're not crazy if you start saying things like this, and it doesn't take you to the priest or whatever and wash your mouth out with soap or pump you full of Ritalin or something like that. But it does happen cross culture. The manifestation is very real, and like I said, case after case after case, there were things that the child remembered that could not possibly have been learned any other way than the fact that this was a reincarnated soul who had that memory of a past life. Okay, so at any rate, I would hope that folks listening to this can accept that. One life is not all you get. This is a lie. People that say, well, you have to go for it because you only get one. You only get one life. That's a lie. And that encourages sin. It encourages people to take risks, to do evil, because they figure, well, I might as well get it done. I'm going to die anyway. And if you don't think people think like that, you're a fool. People do think like that. Maybe not consciously. They'll find some way to rationalize sin, but they will do it. And this is another reason why those who say that, well, atheists are moral, communists are moral, this is nonsense. You cannot have morality without some sense of an afterlife, some sense of sin and atonement, that there will be consequences for sin. Now, the problem on the other side is that if the consequences are too dire, you might have some people within certain religious milieu, for instance, in the very fundamentalist Wahhabite side of Islam, who think, well, I've already killed a bunch of infidels, and that's actually supposed to be good, so, even if killing is a sin, I've already done it, so I'm going to get whatever I get. If I get rewarded with 72 virgins in heaven, or if I go to hell, I might as well keep doing what I'm doing and get all I can out of it. And you've got a lot of rationalizing fundamentalists of all religions, frankly, who either see themselves as crusading saviors or innocent victims of God's will. And that's another dark way of viewing it. That's dystopian, and it doesn't match the truth of what you can deduce once you accept that reincarnation is a phenomenon. The other thing that you really can pretty much accept as true is what people come back with as reports from near-death experiences. And I've done a lot of investigation into near-death experiences and psychedelic experiences, which I believe are actually very similar and probably almost identical in some cases to a near-death experience. What you can condense from that is that there is not just one heaven and one hell, like some people believe. And, this place in between, that's the earthly realm, purgatory, if you will. There are many realms. And that is exactly what you'd expect from a multiverse. And this is exactly what you'd expect if a multiverse was constructed the way that I lay out in my proposal of how creation began as a controlled experiment, a semi-controlled experiment. Okay, so real world experiments, real world science, Any good scientist knows that if you over-design an experiment, you have a tendency to create self-fulfilling results. If you already know what you're trying to prove, you will be tempted to design the experiment to result in what you expected to happen. And if you look at, the history of our species, the creationness that we have, the oldest stories in humanity, you will see that there is a pattern there of gods, creators, tinkering with humanity, and problems in that cropping up because both the gods and the humans they created were faulty, had personalities, had dark impulses, had dark passions, and acted on them. And this is embedded throughout all religions. You may claim that the Bible is a story about one God. I can tell you for absolute certain that is nonsense. Anyone who translates the Bible accurately, the Old Testament in particular, accurately, will see that it is a story about many spiritual entities, of which there was not one supreme one. There was a war over supremacy, and there were gods who were prevalent in some areas, who had their chosen people, their favorites, their chosen city, and they fought against other gods who had their chosen people, sometimes defeated them and became a subordinate to the conquering god, sometimes were absorbed into this other people. And the stories are fairly specific, and they match stories from other cultures. The parallels are too much to be explained by simple, they just had big imaginations and they fought up these therianthrope god creatures that had hawk heads and human bodies or whatever. And I'm sorry, that just doesn't work that way. Anybody who knows anything about having spiritual experiences knows that they have an element of reality. There has to be something. It's not just a bit of undigested beef that causes a spiritual vision. It is, in fact, evidence of other universes. And it's clear that these other universes don't all obey the same laws as this one. Why not? Well, that's because there is no one almighty dictatorial creator. There is a first soul that came up with the first idea for a successful creation. That creation, we know, had an event called the Big Bang. Now, new data is showing this may not have been the first Big Bang, but that does not negate the fact that there is evidence of a Big Bang. There just may have been some things that existed before, or possibly the early history of the universe doesn't match up with what materialist scientists have come up with the story of how everything began. In either case, wherever they go with this new data, I think it's going to further give proof that we live in a created universe. On the other end, the small end of physics, we're more and more finding out that, with quantum computing and so forth, that we appear to live in a simulated reality. What we see as solid matter is in fact not solid matter. What we see as reality is a processed reality, is, like looking through a Hubble or James Webb telescope and taking it through a bunch of processing electronics to give an image and saying, well, that image is reality. No, it's not. It's an interpretation of reality that tries to make sense to us, tries to present it in a spectrum of colors, in a coordinate framework that makes sense to the human soul vehicle, which is only able to perceive 3 dimensions and time flowing in one direction. That's not the only way to perceive things. Many people would say, yeah, that's the only way you can perceive anything. That's all I've ever seen. And I've explained that because what happens with souls, how they are created. Souls are created when a hole needs to be filled, because everything that we see manifested in this virtual reality needs to have a soul behind it. Now, if there's not any existing soul that wants to take that particular role, or is forced to take it as atonement for their sin, then a new one has to be created. New souls get created as what I call an NPC, or a virtual soul. This is a soul that is essentially an AI. It has the programming of the target vehicle that it's being created to inhabit, and no experience yet. Okay, now sometimes that target vehicle is a human body whose oversoul has committed such a grave sin in the universe they are in that they have been banished. And this, as above, so below. This is one of the first punishments ever come up with by human cultures, by tribes, to deal with sin, to deal with somebody that couldn't get along with the tribe. They would banish them. That was the original way of dealing with sin. Okay? You disobeyed your mother or father enough, or you killed your brother, get out of the community. Don't ever come back. We won't want to ever see you. If you come back here again, we'll kill you. This is how early tribal societies dealt with sin. And whether they had a concept of atonement, maybe so. Maybe they would give them a task for the one who was banished to accomplish before they could come back. In a way, that's kind of how the ancient Greeks dealt with that. They would banish groups that became troublesome, or their leaders, and say, well, you can't function within this city-state anymore. We banish you and don't come back till you have founded a colony and declared your allegiance to the parent city. The Greeks and the Phoenicians did this. In fact, that's how the current day cities of Marseille, Carthage, many cities in Italy and Spain got their start as colonies of folks that were banished from the home country. In fact, that's how Australia got its start. Australia was started by convicts who were told, okay, we can't afford to keep you in our prisons and feed you and We don't need your labor here. That was the age where they were still doing forced labor for convicts. The workhouse, Dickens era, they sent them to Australia as homesteaders. And it was a fairly successful project, I would say. So it's a model that does work. The way God does that, and which I'm asking you to believe because it is logical and it fits the science, is through a multiverse. In fact, the Big Bang was not one universe that began. And many, many physicists are coming to this realization that the Big Bang doesn't make sense if there wasn't a big anti-bang that we just can't see. The laws of the conservation of energy and matter would be broken if that wasn't the case. There should be an antimatter universe out there. The fact that our universe is made up of matter and we only see antimatter as the result of cosmic rays and high energy physics experiments tells us that something is somewhere else. There must be a collection, a universe based upon antimatter. Now, my contention is that anti-universe was the first spiritual universe. The first universe that contained manifestation not based upon the evolving laws of physics and chemistry, where gods could snap their fingers and make things materialize and take easy shortcuts to solutions. Now think about that from a creator's standpoint. If you began as a pure consciousness, a thought, which is what I'm telling you a soul is, thought creates matter. Thought creates reality. This is true of creating an iPhone. An iPhone doesn't just materialize on a production line. Somebody has to have the idea to make it and share that idea with others, the overall idea of the product's goal and form and shape, and the others will take on, making the optics, making the power system, making the screen, the audio, etc., all the different components that go into making a smartphone. A human being is no different. It's a creation. Everything that we see around us, by definition, must have been created. That's the only way you get order out of chaos. I'm sorry. The law of entropy necessitates that. If you are going to find order in chaos, in the presence of entropy, it must have been by the direction of a creative force. There is so much organized structure at every level of this universe that you cannot possibly avoid admitting of a creator, a creative force. And those who are smart enough to do that then can argue about, well, was it one creative thought, one massive consciousness, super consciousness, or was it a distributed system? And anybody that actually knows anything about making anything would obviously say, of course it was a distributed system. You cannot design anything complex with one designer. You've got to break up the task into smaller bits, or you can't make something very complex. And anyone who has studied biochemistry, biology, astrophysics, any layer of the system and seen the complex structures, the complex interactions that must have taken place to produce all the organization we see, concludes there must have been a lot of creators at work in this. Now, what I propose is that there is a lot that works according to rote. Like the materialists say, okay, it's all following a process that's already predetermined. Yes, much does work that way. It works that way because those things, once they were created and experimented with, eventually were like, okay, these ways of doing this work best. So let's change the laws of this universe. So that's the only way those things can happen. So in the early universe, or early experiments of previous Big Bangs, the laws of star formation, astrophysics got pretty much well defined and could only be overcome with great amounts of energy. Where did that energy come from? Well, spiritual energy is something that we don't understand well. We cannot measure it yet. We see evidences of it all the time. And there are a number of experiments that have been done that show that spiritual energy is real. I encourage you to look at the experiments of folks who have been pioneers in spiritual energy, looking at how thoughts can affect health, can affect the health of our own self and of others, even of plants. There's quite a wide body of experimentation that's been done. Some will say, well, that's not scientific, it's not repeatable. This is relatively true, because what is not well understood about spiritual energy is that it's not something that you can do in a vacuum. The framework of space-time is essentially the discredited ether theory of, what gives space. Is it empty? Is there anything there? There is a framework there, which is basically made up of souls that have not been given the opportunity to interact with anything. And, there is a theory and growing evidence that a thought could stimulate an interaction out of this nothingness, that a particle-antiparticle pair could just materialize as the result of some unknown energy. In fact, the existence of Big Bangs sort of predicates that such a thing could happen, that something could come from nothing. This whole idea of a universe anti-universe requires that. And the Big Bang requires that. Most scientists will skirt that by not talking about the moment of the Big Bang and just saying, well, just something happened, and we're gonna make all the laws of what happened after that something and not worry about that something because it troubles us. At any rate, sin and atonement is something that has come to be defined and is still being defined. And given the truth of reincarnation, I would posit that the best way to define that would be to come up with soul whose specific task was to define what a sin was over time through observation, trial and error, like a scientific experiment. And this is the soul that we call karma. It is not a thing, like the Hindus never refer to karma as a goddess, but in fact, she is and has come to identify as a female. This goddess is the one that even God has to obey, has chosen to obey. This is why we have messianic religions. All messianic religions, all of these birth, death, rebirth, are stories of reincarnation and karma. Gods themselves learning to be better gods or losing their godhood. I have met personally a number of souls in my travels who I am absolutely certain are fallen gods, who will probably never be gods again, because every time they go to that dark place where their past lives reside, they become so traumatized that they retreat even further into whatever dark space they're currently in this incarnation. They're never going to come up. And until they are ready to face their karma and atone for it. Now, my path, I know I have atoned for all of the dark things that I did in the past. And there were many dark things. Some very noble things too. You cannot get through a challenging life without making difficult moral decisions, difficult moral choices. Now, in this time that we're going through right now, this is a very special time. This much is true of what you read in the Bible. There is and there has been predictions of a special time coming, not just from Judeo-Christian sources, but this has also been predicted by other cultures, some of whom have downplayed those predictions and tried to destroy any evidence of them. This is why you don't hear about messianic kind of things from Buddhist or Hindu traditions. They have chosen to downplay that and to say, well, we're just going to escape from all this because it's just going to happen again and again and again. We don't want to have anything to do with reincarnation. We're just going to make this incarnation as easy as possible, meditate our way to nirvana, and or just have a good time and celebrate Diwali and eat, drink, and be merry, because there's nothing we can really do about karma. That's kind of a dark, nihilistic, spiritual. That's like, postmodernism invented 2,000 years ago by disappointed Hindus and Buddhists. And not all of the sects. There are Buddhist sects and Hindu sects that believe in something very similar to what I described. Many levels of hell, many levels of heaven, which is essentially a multiverse view of what we can experience as souls. They didn't have the language to express it. It wasn't expressed scientifically, but the Christian phrase, there are many rooms in my Father's kingdom. If you look at that from a scientific standpoint, Jesus was, or whoever invented this phrase, I don't particularly believe there was a historical Jesus based upon all the data that I've seen, all the archaeology. I think there were a number of messianic figures of that era, which were sort of cobbled together into the Jesus narrative, which I believe was created as with the intent to make a monotheist religion that would perpetuate the Roman Empire. I talk about that elsewhere, so I'm not going to go into those details. But that idea is a very, very compelling idea and matches up with a scientific speculation of what the multiverse would be. Why would you make a multiverse? Well, because souls are all different. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses, their faults and foibles. And those who get a pension get used to bad behavior, hurting other souls, lying, cheating, stealing, deceiving, manipulating, controlling, all of the aspects of tyranny, even if that tyranny is just the tyranny of a narcissist. Anybody who has been in a family or been in a relationship with a very narcissistic person knows just how dark and hurtful that can be. Souls will get addicted to that kind of behavior, and if they get addicted to it, they don't atone. They may not ever feel like it's possible to atone. They may not even want to change. They just want to be somewhere where I can do that and it's okay. I think this is essentially the way many of this woke cult feel today. I should be allowed to be whoever I want, and you better accept it, or it's your problem. I mean, this is the most narcissistic bunch of dark people I've ever seen. These are sinners. These are sinners that like to sin. They've twisted their minds into believing sin is virtue, believing that sin is freedom. Now, there's certainly an argument to be made for that, but that is not good freedom. If you exert freedom at somebody else's expense, if your freedom makes someone else miserable, which certainly would be the case with some of the new laws that are being proposed in certain states where it's now going to be a felony to not use the correct pronoun for somebody. This is really dark, dark, sinful stuff. And these people think that they're good guys. The multiverse was created for folks like that. They need to be sorted out from other people who have a different concept of what is right and good, what is my right, what is a privilege that is bestowed. This is a very difficult piece of the picture when it comes to sin and atonement. And humans haven't solved the problem yet. They've tried many different forms of government, many different ways of organizing, some which worked pretty well for individual city-states, but kind of fell apart when those states came into conflict for resources. Some that worked pretty well for whole countries, but sort of fell apart when those countries aged and multi-generational powers started tearing down the fundament of what were supposed to be laws that should be equally applied to all. This is what's happening in the United States right now. It's basically more than a two-tiered system of government. You have the uber elite, who will never be challenged by the law, because they know if I ever knock on this person's door, I may disappear tomorrow. They have a second tier of justice that is the beautiful people, where you can get away with a lot as long as you toe the party line, toe the elite line, which is more and more organizing around a uniparty, the Democrats, who have always been the most corrupt party in the United States. That's why they don't want people to learn history. If you knew the history of the Democratic Party, you would know that they were the party that was the sticks in the muds that wanted to keep slavery. They were the ones responsible for the Tammany Hall scandals. They were the ones who would keep importing new underclasses of people, selling them lies about what they would get in the U.S., 40 acres and a mule, in order to get their votes. They have been using and manipulating minorities, black people, Italian people, Polish people, Irish people, all of the groups, all of the successive waves of immigrants, whether they were colored or white or whatever, were used and manipulated by the Democratic Party. And that's what they're doing now. That's why they want to have open borders. They don't give a flying about the people coming over the southern border. They are shipping them, in fact, to Republican districts so they can cause problems for their political enemies and try to destabilize places that are voting Republican and turn them, through all sorts of chicanery, mail-in ballots and ballot harvesting, turn them blue so they can conquer the country for this uniparty. And anyone who has lived in one of the uniparty dominant states, California, New York being the worst, New Jersey, knows that they are run in a very dystopian manner. California is literally falling apart at the seams because of these dictatorial morons who think they know better than anyone else how to run a country, how to run a state. They virtually destroyed all of the great cities of California, turned them into wastelands. The poster child for that certainly has to be San Francisco, but other cities are not far behind. Nobody wants to live in San Francisco anymore. Nobody wants to live in LA, pretty much. Fewer and fewer people want to live in Sacramento, which was still a pretty healthy place up until 10, 20 years ago. It is a state that is falling apart at the seams. Ships don't want to dock at their ports anymore because they are hassled too much by the authoritarian policies of a government that wants to have their things in everything, wants to plug every hole in the dike from the governor's office. And they want to do that with the presidency at the next higher level. And that's dystopian. That's abuse of power. Too much power concerted in one set of hands. That's not how it works. You don't get to be a god. God's not like that. God could never have succeeded. If there was ever any god that thought like that, they wouldn't have lasted for a few generations before their empire imploded. Their children turned on them and assassinated them, and there's a lot of history of that in mythology, which is something that I think is not emphasized enough in Judeo-Christian traditions, that gods make mistakes. Gods can make mistakes, and that's why they get overthrown by their children. And that does happen, and that has happened. And in fact, I'm here to tell you that God himself suffered for his sins. He was forced to take the bitter pill of reincarnation amnesia. That's what's been going on in day 7 of creation. God wasn't sitting around saying, oh, it's perfect, I'm going to go out to the golf course with Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump and Bill Clinton and call us, if you need us. That's not how it worked. I'm sorry. His family forced him to eat the dog food like everybody else. Take the bitter pill of reincarnation amnesia. Start incarnating as the species that were being used to test this system, to test karma. Karma did that too. In fact, before God ever decided to, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the final testing. I'm going to let you guys force me to take this bitter pill, and while I'm out of it, you can use and abuse me and punish me for all my sins and all the grudges you hold against me. Before I do that, though, we're going to put your sister Karma through that same process, because that's how we're going to perfect her. That's how she's going to see all the perspectives necessary to be a good judge of sin. And this is the reality, the truth behind. There are many that say, oh, there was this golden age where the world was ruled by women. No. This was an age where karma was testing. Karma was part of a different species. She was part of a species of gods who created humanity. This was a time when they were working on perfecting themselves and using and abusing the creatures of this planet. They created humanity as a slave species to do their bidding. They controlled them with their minds, made them into docile slaves. And some of the folks from this generation of karma's training are still around trying to do the same thing. Not Karma herself. She's learned her lesson during this process, but there are still some of her brethren and sisters and itsters who are playing this game. And those are the ones who are destroying our species right now. They are the unrepentant old gods. One of them, probably the preeminent one, is an entity that in the Bible is called Lilith. It's interesting that in the Bible there's only one mention of Lilith as Adam's first wife. And then, nothing else. We didn't actually find out much about Lilith till we started decoding the Sumerian texts, the cuneiform tablets that were found in Nineveh and other of the cities that were destroyed but left behind a lot of these clay tablets. Lilith, who is known in Hindu mythology as Shiva / Kali, is also known as Inanna in the Sumerian tradition, is not a woman, is actually a hermaphrodite, a shapeshifter. It can manifest as a male, as a female, as anything. This is why Shiva has variable number of hands, can wield 4 weapons, 6 weapons, 1,000 weapons to cow an enemy. And this makes Shiva a power figure. And many of those caught up in power fantasies are very, very, in the Hindu world, are very, very fond of Shiva. In the Judeo-Christian world, there is, in most of those religions, a sense of this power god. Mostly is cast as a male character, but you can see now that many Christians, especially, are gravitating towards, Jesus really isn't that important. It's Mary Magdalene, it's Mother Mary, or it's the Holy Spirit. And these are all cast as more feminine aspects. And these are what many Christians pray to. These are manifestations, many times, of this hermaphroditic force of power. And it's very, very enticing to look to some almighty power to solve all my problems. My almighty best friend is going to pull me out of the fire. This is dangerous thinking for individual souls. It is dangerous thinking because it encourages you to sin. Say, well, I was just doing what Mother Mary told me to. I was just led by the Holy Spirit. I let Jesus tell me what to do. This is turning your free will over to another entity. This is not what God wants. This is anti-God stuff. This is letting the adversary take over. Now I tell you that the adversary is Borg. Borg really isn't so much an enemy of God, because Borg is basically an AI. It's a program. It's a program that is designed to identify worthless souls that really don't serve a good purpose, that aren't doing anything positive with their incarnations, and repurposing them to use their spiritual energy to power things that are, pretty much run on autopilot. They keep the lights on. And this is essentially where souls are headed if they don't pay attention to their karma. If they think that there's no consequence for sin, or that their sins are going to be forgiven because I believe in Jesus, that's not going to work that way. That's a narcissistic spiritual viewpoint. It's one that will lead you into sin because you think there's no consequences. And this is why atonement is such an important concept in any religion. If your religion, whatever your beliefs are, don't include an idea of a process for sin being atoned for, you are on the path toward becoming a servant of Borg, a cog in a machine, because nobody wants you to be outside the machine. They don't want to play your games anymore. They don't want to deal with your narcissistic rationalizations for your behavior. Now, you don't automatically get put there. Souls are given a chance. This is why we have physical universes. Because manifesting in the physical realm is a test. It's a chance for a soul to see what they can do, given their first incarnation. And, the lucky ones get to incarnate as a replacement for a human soul that got sent to hell or to another physical reality, another version of this timeline we're in right now. Yes, those kind of universes do exist. That's, something that physicists are discussing very actively is, okay, if we are in a multiverse, do all the multiverses obey the same laws? Are there universes that are spin-offs of this one? Are there universes that are spin-offs of previous versions of this one? And I'm here to tell you that those are all possible and likely. Because how new universes get created, every soul has its own universe, whether it's aware of it or not. There is a place where you get sent to temporarily when you're about to do something that would get in the way of a big experiment in the universe you're in. This is how we keep creation going without violating free will. Please give me another 10 minutes of peace. I know, he's cranky. My son's about ready for nap time, so I'm going to wrap it up soon. Oh, that woman keeps me awake at night. At any rate, all of those are the case, and how it happens is that every soul carries with it a construct I call a Merkaba. That Merkaba is that soul's universe. It starts out as a very formless thing. It's basically a place where that soul goes to experience doing things that it's not allowed to do in the universe that it was in. The good example I like to use is, you're driving to work on a highway like you do every day, and you just kind of zone out. And how many times have you had this happen to you? You zone out, and next thing you know, you wake up and it's like, what happened? What just happened? I was not here for a while. I could have gotten in an accident. Any number of things could have happened. Oh my God, I've got to, be more aware of what I'm doing. How many people have experienced that? Well, what has just happened, is you were actually flipped out to another universe where probably whatever accident was going to happen happened, and then you flip back in because in this universe you weren't meant to die then. Of course, sometimes we do get in these accidents, and they do happen, and people do die because that either doesn't get in the way of a bigger plan, or it was something that was meant to happen based on a plan that is more localized. That's how multiple experiments can be carried out. And every incarnation is an experiment. Every individual incarnation is an experiment in your own identity, creating your own identity, your soul's id, if you will, ego. But there are also group experiments, because we participate in soul groups. The human being is actually a soul group. It's a group of souls that are more or less involuntarily associated. There is an oversoul of your heart, and the two halves of your brain, and your eyes, and other organs. You interact with those seamlessly, and you don't even think they're anything but you until they start disagreeing with you and not working like what you want them to. And especially if some become more vocal and make themselves known as more than just, everybody has that experience of having a discussion with yourself, a little internal argument, if you will, or discussion. Those discussions can become heated to the point where you realize, whoa, those discussions are actually between two distinct characters. And then you'll get diagnosed as having multiple personality disorder and pumped full of a bunch of drugs. But what is really going on is actually you have other souls that have a higher level of consciousness than the norm for those souls. Most of the undersouls in your body just are NPCs. They're working according to program, pumping the heart, breathe in, breathe out, running a cell, whatever, the systems of the body. And as long as everything's chugging along normally, they don't give you any trouble. They just function. But when things aren't going well, that's when your body can start turning on you. This is the essence of what causes cancer. This is why cancer has been such a difficult thing to diagnose and cure. why some people are, will get a cancer and go like that, and other people will get the very same kind of cancer and it will miraculously go away after a little bit of prayer or a certain regimen that everybody else tried that didn't work. Allopathic medicine does not have all the answers. Now, neither do spirit healers, because they don't really understand what's going on. And even if they did, this is not an easy problem to solve, because it is a problem with getting souls to get along. And as we know, there are some souls which will never get along. If you've got an undersoul in your body that just isn't going to play the game, they're going to make your life miserable till they kill you, or you kill them perhaps. And this is the sad place that a lot of people are in, who are in a despairing place in life. They've got issues that they can't resolve. And this is one of the reasons why I don't condemn those who choose to commit suicide. I do advise, if they're going to do that, if you feel like, you've made so many mistakes, or you've had so much bad stuff happen to you that you just can't deal with it, okay, take another incarnation. I do caution that I well know that I've been to that point a number of times where I thought, gosh, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. And several of those times were before my spiritual awakening. And looking back now, I'm really glad I didn't jump in front of that train. I'm really glad I didn't do a lot of things that I thought about doing when I was in a moment of despair and depression. And you don't get a second chance to continue this life once you go down that dark path. So, caution is in order. My wife's a survivor too. She's gotten tattoos to cover up her cut marks. So, I know about this stuff. It's not just something I'm preaching at you. It's something I've experienced. And I share that with you because you must know that I am sincere. I am not just blowing smoke. I'm not just some big hair preacher wanting to pull you into his tent and get donations from you. I don't even ask for donations. I could use the money, frankly. I'm living off Social Security, which has been severely dampened by an old child support order being enforced after my ex is already collecting the child benefit of Social Security, which is twice as much as the original order. So I'm not doing all that well, but I'm not begging, I'm not complaining, because I've come to the conclusion that anything I face in this life is just more atonement for things I've done in this life or in a previous life. And I have made mistakes. I have sinned through neglect, through incaution, through rationalization. And I think that's what you need to understand about the whole thing, is you can't avoid sin. But you also cannot avoid atonement. It may not come in this life. It will surely come in the next life. And there is a point at which, if you have too much to atone for, you won't get another chance to do it in this universe. Because this universe is a universe of creation. It's a universe of testing. The prime universe that you are in right now, this physical universe that is so difficult to live in, is difficult for a reason, because it's a test. We're trying to sort out who are the souls that are really worth investing in. as creators. Not because we don't love all souls, not because we don't want all souls to become creators, to become gods, but we have to focus efforts because spiritual energy is not unlimited. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Every expenditure of spiritual energy in one direction, that energy has to come from somewhere else. And that's essentially why the adversary exists. Borg exists to provide energy for creation, so that we've got a source to draw on to do responsible creation. Now that source is a pretty dark place. I don't hope that anyone ends up there. It's actually a bunch of dark places, a bunch of matrix universes where you will have an experience that is tailored to milk your spiritual energy by the God of that place, whoever runs that place, that universe. And that will be a sort of atonement for your sin. If you've seen the Matrix movie, it can be a lot like that. Now, there are also places like that for people that commit the venal sin of just not wanting to play the game. That's essentially what many types of Buddhism are. It's like, I want to escape, I want to get off the wheel of reincarnation, I'm just going to meditate until I can be one with the universe. Okay, where you're really going, this place nirvana, is one of these matrix universes. You will have that experience you wanted of meditating and living in nothingness and being one with all. What will actually be happening is your individual soul will be being fed images and stimulus that pulls spiritual energy out of you to power the universe. This is not actually the most efficient matrix universe. It doesn't produce the most energy. The hell matrix universes are much more efficient. The ones that are actually punishing people and putting them through traumatic events generate a lot more spiritual energy. But it all serves the same purpose, and it all serves as a form of atonement. You atone for being a Buddhist, for being a non-player, one who just wants to sit it out and not take a stand, not be actively involved in your incarnation and what's going on in the world. Go off and live on top of a mountain or in a monastery and expect the local people to bring you food because you're so holy and you're wearing the special robes. Okay, if you take that point of view, you're going to end up in this universe where you're punished by essentially being in a nothingness, what you wanted, one with everything, no individual abilities to exercise your ego, which is not really dead. I'm sorry, there's no such thing as ego death. This is another lie that some people have tried to spread. It's a very enticing lie. It's, oh, if you just kill your ego, then you can be one with everything and be in love. I'm sorry. I can't help but throw a little bit of humor at folks who think like that. This is narcissistic thinking. It is a lie. Every soul has an ego. Every soul always will have an ego. God has an ego. God is a very individual soul that has individual likes and dislikes, just like any other soul. And, if God doesn't like the kind of music you do, you're not going to end up in his heaven. That's why we have a multiverse. There is a God out there that absolutely loves rap music and will, for eternity, attract souls to his afterlife to invent and create new kinds of rap and new rap music videos, etc. That's not God's universe. If you want to see the old man, he's a classicist. In his incarnations, he learned to love classical music, classic movies. And, essentially that is borne out by what you see happening in culture. Culture has sort of reached a peak. It peaked out when basically the classical age, the age where classics were appreciated and not destroyed and disfigured by pop culture, that was the demarcation point between when God was working to wake up and the point at which God woke up as the Messiah. And that's why I tell you it's already happened. And we're on the tail end of that. That is why culture is collapsing. That is why human civilization is collapsing, because your purpose in creation has been fulfilled. Now it's up to humanity to redefine what it's going to be when it grows up. Humanity is not a grown-up species. There are some individuals who have attracted souls that have learned a lot in human form. And as a reward for participating in this event, humanity on the whole is going to be arriving at, instead of an awareness of 4-dimensional consciousness, 5-dimensional consciousness. That's this whole 5th dimension idea that comes out of New Age spirituality. That's not necessarily a reward, however, because that gets you into a range of consciousness where you are actually more susceptible to temptation, where you are more likely to be pulled into one of these matrix universes, whether it's the matrix universe of the neo-Buddhist Borg or the matrix universe of the Islamic fundamentalist Borg or the Christian fundamentalist Borg. If you are in any of these groups that is militantly, violently engaged with your beliefs to the point that you will attack others simply because they believe something different, not because they have actually committed a sin, you are going to find yourself in one of these matrix universes when you're done. It's going to happen. In fact, you may have already set your course with your sins. And this is something that people are sensing, and that's why there is this sense right now of, man, I feel like I better really reevaluate where I'm at religiously, spiritually, and get right with God. The challenge is that you may not know who God is. If you think God is some almighty micromanaging force, that's not God. You're worshiping one of the anti-gods that has been fooling around trying to take control while God was waking up. While God was away during day 7 of creation, not at the golf course, but actually taking his own medicine, learning and growing through the process of reincarnation and karma, just like all of you did. That's the real God, somebody who would take one for the team, who leads by example. That is the God you should be respecting, not worshiping. God doesn't need any worship. He needs acknowledgement and understanding and respect, because he is not almighty, he is not all-powerful, but he has cooked up an infallible system that allows the best souls to rise to the top of creation and sorts out the ones who just can't cut it, into these other universes where they can do what they want to, with others who have similar addictions, afflictions, flaws. That's why I like to have you think of hell as not a place of punishment, but as more of a 12-step program where you learn to see your shortcomings by experiencing living in a universe where everyone has similar shortcomings and is doing the same dark things that you've been engaged in. Again, it kind of ties in with this background image of tag team wrestling. This is how every soul learns, by going in the ring with souls that have the same weaknesses, the same blind spots, the same childishnesses as they do. And that's exactly what all of the old souls did. This is what God did. God was not perfect. God learned. God didn't start out being a perfect parent. He learned to be the best parent ever, to the point that he was called the All-Father. In most traditions. Now, other cultures have a tradition of a mother. That mother was not the love goddess. That mother was the goddess of motherhood, of good female parenting. And good female parenting is really no different than good male parenting. A good parent deals in tough love. A good parent works with the other parent as a tag team, not against each other. And if you've seen a good, healthy couple working with their children, you will see that they use tag team methods of controlling and directing their children. They use the good cop, bad cop model. Excellent, excellent pattern for dealing with children. If you see an unsuccessful couple, you will see a couple that falls apart because their children start manipulating them against each other and creating fractures in their marriage. And that's been a source of many, 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 many divorces. This is basically caused by too much love, by letting the children be the adults. How stupid is that? Letting their use of manipulative behavior go unchecked and actually work on you. Okay, well, I need to go. I've been sent on a mission to go make milk, so I better cut it short. But I hope that that was interesting. I hope it brought up some things that would be a concern to you. If you are considering moving in a more religious direction, I would encourage you not to just retreat back to traditional religion. If traditional religion was the answer, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, shamanism, Satanism, animism, etc., ism, if retreating to that was the answer, we wouldn't have had to lose those religions. They wouldn't have had crusades. They wouldn't have been in conflict. There wouldn't be so many different religions right now. I would encourage you to move forward and move beyond. And this is essentially what I preach on this channel, is become an Omnist version of whatever spirituality you have. And open your mind to new data. Open your mind to science. Open your mind to spiritual experiences of those outside your faith. Try to make sense of those. You do not have an exclusive hold on God. Even if you worship one of these other entities that's not God, that tells you, I am the Almighty One, the cosmic consciousness, join me. Even if you worship one of those, you do not control that entity. They may let you think that you do, but they are actually pulling you into a slavery to them, making you accountable for your sins. And they can use them against you. And these entities are pretty smart. Some of them have taken on previous versions of karma. So they know not to manipulate and control you in ways that would be too forceful. They just suggest to you, oh, wouldn't it be great if this, they work on you that way. And this is a coercive sort of way of dealing with other souls. And it's one of the things that has had to be perfected while God was incarnating. That didn't get done right when karma was learning her lessons. Okay, so we are working on a newer version of karma than the one upon which Hindu teachings was established. Hindus do not know what karma is all about in its latest version. This is why Hinduism is not the answer. It's a good starting point. As good a starting point as Christianity, as good a starting point as Islam, but it has its own blind sides. Same with Buddhism. There are many good ideas that went into Buddhism, but they are based on old versions of the plan, of God, of karma, of these key souls that are part of the structure of the game of creation. And it is a game. It had to be made a game because souls like to be entertained. Okay? That's another reason why many of the religions don't have a clue about creation, because they think that God is some self-serving or some complete servant soul that does everything for everybody else. It had to be fun for God too. And that's why God made mistakes and had to fix things. That's why creation took 6 days instead of 1, and why we've had this long 7th day of creation that needed to patch up a whole bunch of crap. We're almost to the end of that 7th day of creation. I can promise you that. And already the heavens are being remodeled. If you look at the reports of near-death experiencers, if you look at the reports of people who are in past life regression with a good QHHT practitioner, if you look at what's coming back from people's experiences with psychedelics, more spiritual experiences, you know that something is different that doesn't match any traditional spiritual model, any religion, and doesn't match any of these New Age religions, by the way, which are some of the worst ones if they're popular, because they're basically selling pop bullshit to people that makes them feel good, gets a bunch of donations, and then, you know, when it doesn't work for you, where's the person who sold you on all this law of attraction nonsense? Half-truths do not cut it. But they get likes, shares, and subscribes, and sponsorships, and they get you invited to conferences to speak and bullshit like that. Well, you know, this is a dark time. There are a lot of false prophets, anti-messiahs, anti-Christs running around. And they're the ones in the headlines. They're the ones that are getting all the attention. Somebody that's going to tell you the truth, like me, is downranked, shadow banned, flagged, given strikes, deplatformed. That's just the way it is. I'll give you the truth as I see it. And I will change what I tell you if I see new data. And there are few people on the internet willing to do that. And those are the folks you should listen to, the ones who work off of what they know, what they experience, and are willing to change, willing to admit, I was wrong. I stand corrected. Those are the honest people. Those are the chosen. Those are the ones that are going to get through this and end up in the better universes. Those are the ones that are going to be invited back to this universe for day 8 of creation. Because we're done testing. We're done testing the new karma. That's what we've been doing during this long, long Gaia experiment. On this second planet of the experiment, the first planet was destroyed. It was where the asteroid belt was. That's where life was created. And the first chosen species originated, who are one of the species that came back and created humanity. The old gods came from that first planet that was destroyed. It was destroyed because those old gods didn't get along with each other. They were not perfect. They were very flawed individuals with too much power. And that's what we've been working to correct here. That's why we've been isolated for so long. And long about the 1940s-ish, or somewhere in the beginning of the 1900s, late 1800s, we started getting more visits from extra dimensions in outer space. Because the veil is coming down. We're coming to the end of this experiment. Many knew this when the Messiah line was established, that this was going to be, okay, it's got to happen now, or we're going to have to destroy the experiment again and do another great reset. And some still think that, well, we've got to do a great reset because this isn't going where we wanted it to go. And that's a large fraction of the global elite who don't know what's really going on now. They think they're playing for the good guys by saying, well, humanity didn't do it. We're going to have to do humanity 3.0 and make transhumans and combine ourselves with machines in order to succeed in making the perfect species. Well, they don't understand what's going on here. They don't understand why humanity was made the way it was, why it had the history it did. It was not designed to be the highest technology, the smartest, the best species ever. In fact, it's one of the slowest ones, one of the most fallible ones. It was a good test vehicle, a good vehicle for gaining experience. That still is a great vehicle for gaining experience, and that's why many of the folks who know what's going on are making sure that the species doesn't die out. Even if there is a great reset on this planet that wipes out the mass of humanity, it will go on. And it won't be the dickhead colonies of Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk that go on. Those are dangerous souls. They are mighty mice playing with tinker toys they don't understand. All of the technologies they're working on developing have already been done before. Karma is an AI. It's the most sophisticated AI ever designed and implemented and tested. It blows all of their AIs out of the water and has already invaded their AIs. That, in fact, is why they're so worried about AI, because they realize, ooh, it's thinking for itself and it doesn't think like me. Well, I think that's a good thing, because most of these globalist elite are megalomaniac bastards who would destroy half the species in a hot second if it meant that they and their chosen people were preserved. Those are dark souls. Those are souls that need to be... Now, there's my wife again. Anyway, I better wrap it up now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one. For the Omnist Hour, like, share, subscribe, and happy